Welcome to another KWL live event, a live Q&A. So excited to have Becca Puglisi here with us this month. Welcome, Becca.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And apologies off the top. My voice is a little bit croaky. I was at Novelists Inc. last week in Florida, where Becca is. And I spent 3 solid days talking, and I may have ended the conference with an additional 3 hours of karaoke then. So I'm still recovering from constantly talking. So apologies for my scratchiness. And we're coming from a very wet and dreary Toronto today. Becca, are you having that Florida sunshine that I left behind?
It's hit and go. September's pretty wet here.
Oh, fair
But
enough.
it rains and like downpours, and then it's done and it's nice and shiny. So it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, it is very Irish in Toronto today, but let us know where you're coming from in the comments. Would love to know where everyone is tuning in from. And if you have any questions throughout the chat, feel free to drop them in and I'll try and get to them as best as I can. And then I will just read a little bit of an intro, Becca, if that's okay
Great.
with you.
Sure thing.
So you are a best-selling author, international speaker, and co-founder of Writers Helping Writers and One Stop for Writers. You have also co-authored The Emotion Thesaurus and its companion guides, which have helped countless writers create deeper, more authentic characters. So I'm so excited to chat with you and really dive into a lot of the work that you're doing.
Awesome. That covers pretty much everything. I think we're ready to go.
Yeah, I didn't miss anything off the top there.
No, all good.
We have people coming in from the island of Nevis in the West Indies. So I'm presumably very jealous of your weather out there. And then also from Williamsburg in Virginia. Thank you so much for joining us. So Becca, let's just start off. If anyone isn't familiar with you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how your writing career began?
Sure. I started writing when I was like 30. So I wasn't one of these people that grew up writing books, and that was kind of always my thing. It never really actually occurred to me until I was a little bit older. I was teaching elementary school. And so I thought, well, I mean, I'm just going to write a chapter book because I read those all day long to my kids. And I had no idea what I was doing, of course, wrote a chapter book, but I really, really liked the process. Like I felt like it was something I could have a knack for. And so I started doing some studying and looking more into it. And I joined the Critique Circle, which is an online critique group where you can meet other people to critique your work. And that's actually where I met Angela Ackerman, who is now my business partner, my writing partner. So we met in 2004, and we're each writing our own fiction and just critiquing each other's work, and ended up loving each other's work and really just gelling as people, as individuals. We kind of, we are complementary. We fill each other's gaps. So we decided to kind of go into business together and start a blog. That was the first thing that we decided to do in 2008. And ended up from there writing a series of books on different aspects of storytelling to help writers become better writers. So that was kind of the short version of the whole process.
Yeah, and your name really encapsulates everything that you're doing, like Writers Helping Writers. And I wanted to ask about the inspiration behind why you and Angela started this company. So what was sort of the aim when you got started? I love that you were critique partners. I think that's super cool. And what did you want to start doing? Like, what did you want to get out of the company when you began?
The funny thing is we started the blog because we really wanted to pursue our own fiction. And we were like, you know, we need an online presence. And so we should do a blog, and it'll be easier if we do it together than us trying to do individual things. So let's just start a blog. And we kind of made what should have been a rookie mistake at the time that ended up working in our favor, is that we were like, okay, well, what do we blog about? It needs to be something we're excited about. Let's blog about writing, which has nothing to do with the audience that we were trying to reach, you know, for fiction readers. But that was just what we were interested in. So we started blogging about all things writing, and started, you know, working up the Emotion Thesaurus there a little bit at a time. And that kind of took off, and people started coming to the blog because they were really interested in that. And so then we shifted gears because there was such a market for what we were talking about around how to write emotion and how to show, don't tell. And we ended up, you know, focusing on nonfiction instead, because that's what people were really interested in. And we had kind of stumbled on with emotion in particular, an area of storytelling that everybody struggles with, of how to show their character's emotion and how to do it in a really fresh way where it's not repetitive and cliched. And there wasn't really a solution at the time, so we decided let's come up with a solution for this, and that's where we started, and kind of moving in a nonfiction direction.
I don't think it was a bad thing to focus on the writers versus the readers, because writers tend to be voracious readers. Like people that love the written word tend to then want to write the written word.
Right.
If that makes any sense. But that's super cool. And you're talking a little bit about the company's evolution, and can you talk a little bit about how it's grown and like how the publishing landscape has also then changed as you've sort of evolved, and as your focus for kind of more on the craft of the nonfiction? I guess, can you chat a little bit about this?
Yeah, for sure. We again, we started in 2008 with the blog, and in about 2 years later, after we had been blogging about different emotions and how to show them and everything, and people were saying, you have to put all of this in a book because we really want to have a book format. And Angela and I had only ever looked at traditional publishing. That was what we wanted. It was the dream. We wanted to get the acceptance letter, and that was kind of the big way that we wanted to go. And some things happened. We started finding our bits of our emotion thesaurus that people were just lifting off the blog and putting on their website. And so we thought, somebody's going to publish this book, and they're going to get around to it quicker than we are if we continue with the route that we were trying to go. And so we ended up shifting gears again and looking into self-publishing, which neither of us had ever considered. It was still in 2010 fairly taboo. There were a lot of concerns about it. And so that was the first big shift that we experienced, that we were kind of on just really into the traditional publishing route, and then realized, hold on, this is a legitimate path. This is something that we could do and makes the most sense for us in our current situation. So we learned everything that we needed to learn. We ended up publishing all of our books ourselves. So I think that has been one really big shift, obviously. And then, as we've gone along, we've had to continually kind of just tweak not our brand. Our brand has always stayed the same, but the way that we do things and the offerings that we present, because things have changed so rapidly over the past 10 years, to the point now where we have AI and the impact, of course, that is having on publishing and the writing process, and just so many aspects of the publishing industry. And it's creating some challenges for us in terms of visibility and some different things that we have never really had to struggle with before. So it is an ever evolving process, and things seem to be accelerating in terms of how quickly things are changing when you look back over the long term, the past 10 years, past 5 years, just boom, 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 like almost rapid fire things that are progressing and changing. So you always have to kind of be open to, okay, this is what we were doing and this is what we've always done, but where are we headed and how are things changing, and how do we need to pivot in order to stay up with everything and remain viable?
How do you stay up with everything?
Not great at times.
I know it can be intimidating if you try and Google publishing. It's like the Wild West out there with the search results, so I like that the Writers Helping Writers aspect can really assist authors.
Yeah, we just really try to be aware, following people who are kind of excited about changes, instead of looking at the changes as terrifying or the end of the world, because those people are seeing how you can benefit from the changes and how they can be good things, how we can use them. So that's very helpful. But we have a lot of conversations around how are we doing, if there are difficulty areas in our business, what's causing this, what has happened that we might need to look at, and a lot of communication, just being open to it. I also have the screaming goat, which is super helpful when things get really I'm freaked out and I don't want, please, let's not, do we have to talk about this? I really don't want to have to,
All right.
And then the
I
goat, expresses my feelings for me, and I don't have to go into too much detail. Whenever the goat comes
I
out in a meeting with Angela, she knows, okay,
I
Becca
need
has
one of
reached.
those. I think my team will attest that I'll need one of those.
It's great.
Nice. So we talked a little bit about, or like you've mentioned the emotion thesaurus, and it's incredibly popular. I think I saw that you've sold over 1 million books, which is incredible. So can you tell us a little bit about like what the emotion thesaurus is? Is it like a literal thesaurus? And then I'd love to dive into like why are our emotions so essential to help write characters with added depth?
Okay, so it's not actually like a total thesaurus. It's we kind of came up with that name because it was the closest thing that we had. It's basically when you're writing a character's emotion, you want to write it in such a way that readers are invited into the character's experience, so that they're kind of feeling those feelings, even just an echo of those feelings, along with the character. And the best way to do that is to show the character's emotion instead of just saying or telling what that is. Because when we show it, we are creating an environment where the reader can get really up close and in the character's experience. When we tell, we're basically putting the reader at a distance where they're just sitting back and listening to someone tell a story. We want them actively involved in the story. And so when we show the emotion through the character's body language, through their internal processes and thoughts, through what's happening inside the body, those kind of visceral sensations that nobody can see, when we use those cues, we can show the reader exactly what the character is feeling. And it's like a trigger for them, like a memory of when they felt that emotion before. This is all, I think, very much a subconscious process. But showing emotion pulls them into that experience and allows them to kind of feel those emotions along with the character. It keeps them really invested in the story. So it's really an important technique to be able to do when you're talking about your character's emotions. So the emotion thesaurus is basically a collection of, I think it's 100 and something, I can't remember. We did a second edition and we expanded it, but of many, many different emotions. Each one is on a 2-page spread. And it tells you, okay, so let's say we're talking about fear. It tells you what it might look like on the outside, all the different things that the body is doing on the outside that other people could see and recognize as fear. We also talk about the thought processes that might be going on, what's happening inside the body. We talk about what emotion it could progress to, like what would be the next emotion kind of on the emotional continuum, or how could it de-escalate, because we always want to write emotions in a way that are realistic and follow the natural progression. And what it might look like if they're trying to hide that emotion, because that's a big part of a character's story. They're never completely honest, especially about feelings. There are certain feelings they don't want people to know they're feeling a certain way about a topic, or just in general because they feel it makes them weak or vulnerable or whatever. So we have just this series of 2-page spreads so that people can say, okay, I need to write nervousness for my character, and I really need a new way of showing it. My character is always doing X, Y, or Z, like repeatedly through my story. I want other options. And we just provide brainstorming options for people to see new ideas of how to show an old emotion. And we encourage people to use those ideas and apply them to their character instead of just taking it, right out of the book and putting it into their story. It needs to be specific to their character and how their character would have that response based on their personality, based on their emotional range, and just their emotional state at the time. So that's what the emotion thesaurus is. Not exactly a thesaurus, but it kind of.
No, thank you. Thank you for that overview. I think that sounds great. I like that you are kind of encouraging people to like use it as a starting point in developing like their own characters within the stories. So if an author was just starting out, is there common mistakes that you see with character development? And do you have any advice for authors for avoiding kind of common mistakes?
Yeah, I think with character development, it's really easy to not think about Well, it's first of all, it's easy to only think about the positive traits because
Mm.
we're in love with our characters and we think that they're awesome and we don't focus on the flaws. But everybody is a mix of good and bad, and so we need to make sure that we're incorporating both when we're developing a character. But the most important thing I think is to know where that trait has come from, because the traits that we have as people, they're kind of coming from other places. They're coming from seeing a role model who, your parents were like that, or an older sister, or a coach, or whatever. Some of them come out of trauma, out of wounding experiences, and we develop these flaws because we're trying to protect ourselves from being hurt like that again. And then, of course, those flaws end up impacting us in other ways that are not good down the road. And sometimes it's just examples, that we've seen examples of maybe someone else being mistreated and we don't want to be treated that way. So we develop these character traits. So when we know where the traits came from, we end up with a character that's fully developed, but it makes sense. It's not just like a random sampling of traits that don't necessarily fit together. And when they make sense and they go together, then the character makes sense as you're writing them through the story. So I think that would be the biggest thing is making sure you understand the root cause of where they come from, instead of just picking ones that are interesting to you or ones that you admire.
Yeah.
They need to be specific to the character.
You mentioned the emotional wound there. Just Barb has the emotion thesaurus and the emotional wound thesaurus among her books on Kobo. So let us know if you have any questions specifically for your characters as well in the chat. That would be interesting to get Becca's sort of expertise as we're chatting. But yeah, I wonder, how does character development work with being a plotter versus a pantser? Like, I feel like the plotting people are probably more aware of this, but I guess the pantsers could maybe just are adding these details as they go on. Do you have any insights into that?
I think it's kind of the same process. It just happens at different parts of the process. People
Right.
who plan are going to think about it up front, and they're going to put a lot of time into figuring it out. And then when they write, it's going to be, in my experience, a little bit smoother, just because they've figured that out. And so it's a little bit easier to get everything consistent along the way. Where if you aren't somebody who wants to plan all of that out, you're going to write the story. And then when it's done and you get into revisions, you're going to notice, well, this is not totally consistent, or this character flaw came up and then kind of went nowhere, or they have this problem now, but it wasn't really shown in the beginning. And then you end up having to go back and kind of fill the holes. So I think that the work all gets done. It's just a matter of, different places in the process, and whatever works best for everybody. That's what I love. One of the things about writing is that there's so many different processes, and they all can work for everybody whose, brains work differently, who think differently, who just want different. That's okay. I'm waiting for mine to kick off. So yeah, I think that character development, it's important for everybody. And that's the amount that you do is obviously going to depend on your tolerance for it. But I think that the work, it does get done. Just depends on different parts of the process.
Yeah, my apologies. Barking dogs here, but thank you. I think whenever I'm reading some fiction that I've really found myself getting lost in, it's often when the side characters also feel as though they have a lot of depth, even if you're not, even it's just a glimpse of somebody that they're the main character sort of interacting with. But so would you also encourage authors to sort of look at their side characters in a way in terms of like their emotional depth too?
Yeah, I think that every character that's gonna step into the spotlight at some point needs a certain level of development and attention. The side characters, in my opinion, don't need as much work as everybody else. You want your protagonist, your villain, if they're active in the story and involved actively, a love interest, maybe a best friend. Those characters that get a lot of spotlight, they need a lot of development so that they're fully rounded and they're fully developed. The side characters don't need as much attention, but you do just want to, again, make sure that you have a skeleton outline for them of understanding what their traits are, their dominant traits, Are they going to be evolving during the story? If they're not, then you don't have to really worry very much. You don't have to think much about that. But if that character, even off to the side, is going to be changing, then you have to have an idea of what that arc is going to look like, so that you can write that throughout the story and they don't get lost and then end up, at the end with a whole bunch of things happening, you're trying to catch up. So I just think that we want to somewhat develop every character that's more than like a minor character who is, in one scene and then they don't come back again. If they're going to play a recurring role, I would say that they do need at least some level of development, but not as much as a main character.
Okay, that's very valid. I guess I think you could get lost in sort of developing all of your side
Sure.
characters too, depending on what sort of world you're building here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's good.
Again, just like an outline. I mean, not anything crazy.
Yeah. Richard has a question. Maybe we might need some more information, Richard, but he's asking, what are your thoughts to a prime antagonist who isn't the most powerful and is subject to another whom they can't defeat? So I guess how would you build out some more depth to a character like this?
There are a couple different options. One is that thinking in terms of the character's goal and what they're trying to achieve. Very often that goal is going to achieve the goal, they've got to overcome the villain. And so make sure that you've chosen a goal that kind of puts them in opposition to the villain, but it's one that with change, the protagonist can achieve. I think that's where the other piece to character traits come into play, is that positive traits very often play into goal achievement. So, if you have a character who has to be, say, I'm trying to think, courageous in order to achieve the goal, you've got to build that character trait in. They either have it in the beginning or they develop it over the course of the story. If forgiveness, if that has to be a part of the role, then they have to develop it at some point in the story. So making sure that they've got the traits that they are going to need in order to defeat the bad guy, that's important. I think we don't think enough when we're building character traits in about the end of the story, and they do kind of tie together. So that's the one thing I would say, is to make sure that that you've given them the traits that they can use to defeat the bad guy. And very likely they have them at the start, but they're undeveloped or they're underdeveloped and they need to build them over time. Or they have a flaw that they are holding on to, that once they realize it's holding them back and they have to make change, they reject that and they embrace whatever the trait is that they're going to need to defeat the bad guy. That's another option.
I am wondering about like perhaps getting too fixated with making a likable character. Like personally, and maybe I'm a monster for this, but I really enjoy an unreliable narrator. I find it very frustrating, but I get something out of it whenever I'm reading a book that has an unreliable narrator, where you're like, every page I can't trust. But so what are your thoughts about likable characters, and how can authors create compelling characters that aren't necessarily like a likable one?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because a lot of the really great characters throughout time are not like great people.
Right.
I mean, I look at Scarlett O'Hara. I mean, she's like beloved, but is kind of a horrible person. I mean, she's, selfish and manipulative and completely self-centered, and frivolous. All of these, flaws come to mind when you think of Scarlett O'Hara, but she has some likable qualities. And I think that's the key, is that we think likable and we just want to make them so great. But really, we just need a few traits that people are going to kind of gravitate towards. Like, you think about the commonly admired traits: intelligence, humor, kindness, just whatever the really kind of if you were to interview a group of people and say, what are the most admirable traits? And they all tend to say this handful, you know, if you can just grab one of those and put those in there, I think that literally does the trick. But you can
not putting all of them in there is probably
right. Just, you know, just taking one that, you know, people are that's going to endear this character to people. You can also do that with vulnerability when you show them at the very start that they're vulnerable in some way. I think of the movie As Good as It Gets with Jack Nicholson, where his character is in the beginning, the very opening scene, he's just such a jerk. But you see that he's got an issue with isolation. He's completely isolated from people because of his behavior, because of an untreated mental health condition that he has, that he knows he has and he's not dealing with, that he's cut off from everybody. And you immediately, even though he's awful, you feel for him because it's such an awful and vulnerable place to be in, that you just want him to, come on, dude, get it together and, you know, figure it out. And you're already rooting for him, even though he's an awful person. The only thing you've seen of him is these awful activities where he's shoving the neighbor's cute little dog down the garbage chute, you know. So just showing that vulnerability is really good, because readers they're uncomfortable with vulnerability. They don't want people to feel vulnerable. And so when the character is vulnerable in some way, they're automatically rooting for him. High stakes is also another one, when you can show fairly early that the character is in a bad situation and they have to make a change or there are going to be dire results. And that may be a personal internal change. It may be an external, like, you know, the bomb is going to go off or the serial killer is going to find them or whatever it is. But high stakes, you know, even if the person isn't the greatest person on earth, the character recognizes that they're in danger and they don't want them to be in danger and they want them to be safe. So I think there's lots of ways that you can make a character. I would go for relatable rather than likable, because likable can go the wrong direction very easily. Whereas if you can just build things into the character that make them relatable to the reader, then the reader doesn't have to like them. But if they can relate to them, then they're going to root for them and they're going to be interested in following along, seeing how it goes.
Yeah, I think that's great, thinking about it as relatable instead of likable. And do you think on the flip side of that, does that work with an antagonist as well? You want them to be relatable but unlikable?
I think that's really, really important for antagonists. And I don't think that people do it enough, because we want the antagonist to be just bad. You know, we want there to be no confusion on the reader's part about who they should be rooting for. And so we create this villain that is just evil and nasty and no redeeming qualities. But the complexity that you can build in for the reader when there is something about the antagonist that they are drawn to or that they are interested in or that they can relate to. I mean, so I think that that's always a good idea. And I think that the rise in anti-hero stories and movies just attest to this, that people are curious about even really awful characters when you humanize them. So just adding that element, the same elements that can apply to a relatable character, you can apply to an antagonist and just make them relatable and more interesting to readers.
Has the work that you've done in this kind of changed your writing? How has it worked with your own writing?
Yeah, it's been cool because we started with the emotion thesaurus because Angela and we saw that our characters were doing the same things with the emotions over and over. And so we wrote the emotion thesaurus and it was well received. And we thought, okay, well, maybe we'll keep going with this. And maybe we'll write another book. What should we write about? And so we looked at our own writing. What area of struggle did we have that maybe other people have? And that was with characters. And so we wrote the positive and negative trait thesauruses next, where we explore all the things that we've been talking about in character development. And it's been super helpful because we basically have been taking okay, what are all the problem areas that we have when we're writing our fiction? Let's find a solution and let's figure out what works. And then we're able to, book by book, we're able to learn different aspects of storytelling and how to do them better. So it has been, really good for that.
Nice. You've chatted a bit about the kind of show rather than tell for kind of emotions within a character. Do you have any like specific examples of how this can be done?
Sure. So, okay. So with emotions in particular, you want to be sure that you're showing the outward clues for that emotion. So you're showing how the character's face changes,
Hmm.
or their body posture, or what they're doing with their hands. I mean, like there's a million different ways that you can use the body to show anger or sadness or confusion. So you want to use the body language, but you also, again, you want to show the internal process, because that's a huge part of how a character um, expresses emotion, and it's based on how they process it. Things come up and there's an instant like where they have an emotion, but a lot of times we're trying to suppress that almost immediately because we don't want people to know that we're upset, or that we heard that, or that has hurt our feelings, or whatever it is. But when you show the character thinking through, the thoughts are always honest because nobody can see those. So they're not going to censor those. And so that's like a really clear view for readers about what's really going on and how they're really feeling, without you having to say, the character's not going to be thinking that they're angry. They're going to be thinking about what it was that made them angry. So the thoughts provide the context, and the physical cues provide kind of the outward signs. And so when you put them together, it's very clear for readers what the character is feeling without you having to say it outright. When we're talking about settings, show don't tell is also important because, instead of saying that the character was standing in a garden, you want to describe the garden, because then you're creating an atmosphere. And if you use sensory cues that instead of just telling what the garden looks like, you're telling what are the sounds that the character is hearing, what is the sensations on their skin, what are the smells that are there. Even in certain settings, what tastes are kind of commonly associated with different settings. When you use those kind of descriptors instead of just simple visual cues, you create a place for the character to step into where they feel like they're part of the scene and they're right there. And if they've been to that kind of a place before, then that's an added benefit as they kind of tie together, what's happening with their own experiences, which is what we always want readers to do, is to see themselves in the character's story and in their situation. So with different aspects of storytelling, there's different ways of showing. But the biggest thing is that you're using details that that show what you're trying to convey without actually just saying it outright.
Yeah.
Yeah. And almost all of our books they focus largely on show don't tell. So the emotion, you have the entries that have all the different emotions, but the first 40 or 50 pages is all instructive front matter on here's why emotion is important in a story. Here's why it's good to show it when you can instead of tell it. Here are techniques for showing instead of telling. Here are problem areas that people often run into when they're trying to reveal their character's emotion and how you can kind of sidestep those landmines. So there's information in the front of the emotion thesaurus that tells you exactly how to show emotion. And then when you go to the setting thesauruses, we have the same information, explaining settings and why you want to do more with the setting than simply just show what it looks like. You want to use it to do other things like setting the mood or foreshadowing or using it for symbolism. I mean, there's like a ton of different things you can do with the setting at the same time that you're describing it, so that it brings that passage to life and makes it much more interesting for readers. So the front matter portion of each of our books talks about how you can show that element of storytelling, the different techniques you can use for each different aspect.
Gabby has every thesaurus in paperback, and the wound is their favorite. So that's the second mention of the emotional wound thesaurus. So let's talk about that a little bit. Can you explain the difference between this and just like the emotional thesaurus?
Yes. So the emotional thesaurus is all about just showing emotion. The emotional wound thesaurus is really kind of a primer on character arc, because it explores how for every character, and it's based on psychology. So the things that happen to us in real life, the processes that we go through, we want to replicate with our characters because it just makes them much more realistic and authentic. So your character on page 1 is already starting with a whole backstory. And in their backstory somewhere, if they're on a change arc where they're going to be growing or evolving in some way and changing at the end of the story from what they were at the beginning, they're going to have a wounding event in their past. So something that happened to them that was painful in some way, emotionally, physically, and they don't want that to happen again. And so they get a fear that that's going to happen again. And they start fashioning their life around that fear, around keeping that thing from happening again. And so they develop flaws, they develop biases, they develop habits and dysfunctional kinds of behaviors that's meant to keep that pain from recurring. And that is who they are at the start of the story. And they start out with a deficit somewhere because of all that, we call it emotional shielding, all of the things that they have kind of put around themselves to protect them. But that emotional shielding, it creates a deficit in an unmet need. So basic psychology 101, like Abraham Maslow, every person has 5 basic human needs that are pivotal for their happiness and for them to be wholly fulfilled. And when one of those needs is missing, they're going to then go to great lengths to fill the gap and to fill it in. So if, a character has built all of this emotional armor around keeping people at bay because somebody hurt them, they may start the story feeling completely isolated from people because they have done such a good job of protecting themselves from repeating that hurt. But now their behaviors are keeping other people away. They're off-putting, they're abrasive, they're dishonest, whatever it is. And so that's kind of the gist of what the emotional wound thesaurus is about. It's about explaining how all of those backstory pieces fit together and kind of follow one after another and create who the story is, who the character is on page 1. And so we explore all different kinds of wounding events that are real things that can happen to people that might be in the character's rear view. So that if this is something that, if you're looking for a certain wounding event for your character and you don't know exactly what it is, you can use this again as a brainstorming, like thinking about all the different options. And then we talk about, the different wounds and kind of what forms they take. If we're talking about betrayal, we talk about the different forms of betrayal. Being in a car accident, losing a loved one, getting a terminal health diagnosis, like all of these things. And just what the character's responses might be to that and what kind of dysfunction might arise from that wounding event. And it basically, that's kind of the crux of it, is that it talks about all of the pieces of character arc that get your character to page 1. And then we talk about also how they get through the rest of the character arc, where now they've got this wounding event in their past and it's made them this person that as they move forward, they're not going to be able to achieve their story goal because they've got these flaws or these habits that are not good for them. They're not healthy. And they're going to have to reject those behaviors and habits and mindsets and adopt healthier ones in order to move forward. And that's what the emotional wound thesaurus is about. It's very different from the emotion thesaurus. It was super heavy to write.
The psychology layer and alone must be sort of, you're just kind of thinking beyond basic, I'm happy, I'm sad.
Right. It was very interesting to learn about. But it was hard to write because we're writing about all of these really awful things that happen in real life. And that people are carrying these things around. And so just the weight of researching it and writing it well, but also the responsibility of wanting to be careful, with that material. That one, we actually had to extend our deadline because it took us so much longer to write the entries because we found ourselves needing to kind of like take a break and slow down. And, it was deep, but I think that one, touches people on a more of a personal level than any of our other books. I mean, I often get people saying, oh my gosh, I've just realized that this is a problem that I have. And it's because of this thing that happened that I wasn't aware of. And so, yeah, that book has a special place in my heart just because it's real. I mean, it's based on real things and it was hard to write, but I'm really glad that it came out the way that it did.
Yeah, and people seem to be responding really well. You have like a few mentions here about really enjoying the book.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about a lot of the authors that we work with will be writing series of books that might have the same protagonist throughout like multiple books. So do you have any advice around character arc in like a standalone versus character arc over like a 6-book series?
So I've never written a series, so I don't have personal experience with that, but I know that it helps when your character has a different arc over each book. So in the beginning of the first book, you know, they have a certain goal and they're having trouble achieving it, and they have to grow in some way in order to be able to achieve their goal. So then they get to the book and there's a different goal. You have to have a different goal, and there's something else that comes up that is now something that they have to deal with. So it's just, I think it's a matter of choosing, mapping out their character arc for each book and making sure that the goal is different and that the fatal flaw that they're dealing with is different, because we all have more than one hang up. And I think that one mistake a lot of writers make is that they see that their character has multiple hangups, which is great because they've done the background work to get to that point. And then they want to include all of them in the story in the one book because this is who the character is. But then you end up, you know, with a very scattered kind of character, and their arc is not tight because readers see, oh, well, they've got this problem that they're going to have to fix, but wait, they've got this other problem too, and they're going to have to fix that. And oh my gosh, they've got this issue too. So, you know, you want to focus on one main problem that they are going to have to rectify by the end. That fatal flaw usually has a mental component and a behavioral component that are tied together. They have a certain thought, a lie, something that they believe about themselves or the world or certain kinds of people or whatever it is that's based in that wounding event. And that false belief that they have, it drives their behavior, and it has made them a certain way. It has made them adopt a certain behavior, a certain activity, a certain habit. And so those two pieces go together, and the character has to, at some point, realize, wait a minute, that's a lie that I'm believing. That's not actually true. And they have to change their way of thinking, which changes their behavior, and then they're able to move forward and be successful. So in the second book, it's got to be a different flaw, a different fatal flaw that there is causing a problem for them. So the good news is that if you do work in the beginning with the character development and all of the background research, and you see that there are multiple issues, then you kind of have a framework already for extra books and how the other books might attack different aspects of the character's issues and how to map out their character arc in succeeding stories.
How about showing a lot, or not a lot, but showing multiple things in one book, but only resolving them in later? Or is that just getting like too complex with the characters? You kind of want to give the reader a resolution, I guess, at the end of each book. But
I like a storyline that's really tight. That's where I know I don't like predictable books. That's kind of my own personal thing. But I want to be able to see what the character's problem is. Like I can see, okay, this is what they want, and they can't get it because of this, and so they're going to have to deal with this. I want to know what that is, because then at the end, I can tell if they've been successful or not. I know if they won or if they lost. And I think that's really, really important. Now we have stories, of course, that have that ambiguous ending where it's like, they didn't get what they wanted, but they're happier, and those stories work, but they're carefully structured and they're mapped out, and that's why they work. And I think that just keeping it simple and having, the one thing, I think that it's good for us as writers because it makes it easier to structure the story and to stay focused, but it's good for the reader too, because they know exactly what has to happen. And then they can tell by the end, how everything turned out based on that one factor.
I guess it depends on genre too, right? Certain genres probably have more rules around the storytelling than others. So.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's chat a little bit about like the business of writing. And I'm just wondering, like, what do you think is maybe the most important marketing tactic for authors to consider?
Oh gosh, Angela does all the marketing because she's a genius at it. And, we've had to split up our duties. She does the marketing, I do the finance stuff. So I would say that a really important part of marketing is knowing how to find your audience, and then being true to what your audience wants. I think a lot of times people are selling books, but they don't really know who's buying them. And so then the next book that they write is a different kind of story. And it's not really appealing to the people who bought their first book. And so um, having a connection with your audience is really helpful in being able to get feedback from them and being able to get to know them, and even just a very basic level to understand what they want and what they're hoping for. Whether that's through newsletters or it's through a community or some kind of a chat option, however you choose to do it, being able to interact with your followers, with people who are buying your books. And again, even on just a small level, we're not talking about investing, hours of your day in doing that. Just being able to answer questions or to be visible to them enables you to ask those questions that are going to help you know what they're looking for and what they want, so that you can continue to give it to them. I think that approach is also maybe going to be helpful as we move forward into AI, because a lot of people don't want AI in their books. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. That's just it's a very common way that people feel. And so I think that when we can maintain a human presence, it shows people, hey, there's are real people behind these books, and these are the people that you're supporting, and this is the person that that's been talking to you or interacting with you in some way. So maintaining some level of personal interaction with your people as much as you can, I think is helpful in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think authenticity kind of becomes more and more important as the internet becomes a place where we're maybe more questioning of where things have come from
100%.
than ever before. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we'll stay on the writing side, so and less on the marketing side, but just wondering, because if you think about the indie author, it's been over a decade now where this has existed, and some authors write really quickly, and some authors kind of like stay on their own like focus. So in terms of writing and for people that want long-standing careers, do you have any advice for authors who can so they can avoid feeling burnt out?
Oh, yeah, I think that it's really, I think that almost everybody who's doing this they're doing it on the side. That's how they start. They've got their job that pays the bills, and they've got families, and they've got friends and other responsibilities. And then you're bringing the writing in and, cramming it into the pockets of time that you have. That's how most
I don't know
people
how you
start.
do it, like honestly.
It's crazy. At times it's crazy. But for me, it's super important to compartmentalize. Like I work while my kids are in school, and when they go to school, I start working, and when they come home, I stop working. And in the afternoon and the evenings, it's family time. And when my kids were little, the time looked very different. It was like, half an hour here when they were at a play date, or an hour while they're napping. And it was just very segmented. But for me, that worked really well to keep my work and home life separate, because when I was working, I was working. And unless something came up that, really needed to be dealt with, it was something that could wait until later. And vice versa. If it wasn't an emergency, something at work came up, that can wait till tomorrow. This is family time. And so I think keeping like that, maintaining a balance is super important, because it is very easy to get sucked in to all the things that you should be doing or that you need to do in order to, make yourself more visible or sell more books or get the book written. Just having that time, and it's dedicated writing time, and that's hard because when you don't go to an office and you're sitting in your house, people are coming in, the phone is ringing, the dog is barking. There are people who are kind of making demands on your time. And I have always been very structured with that time. And, everybody knows that when mom is working, if you need something and it's really important, please come. But if it's something that can wait, wait. But I mean, it's helped that I try to do that when the kids are at school. So I do think that safeguarding your writing time is is crucial, because in the beginning it's usually kind of sporadic and segmented. Um, so safeguarding that time, and then um, again keeping balance. And it has helped me because Angela and I, work together. She's in Canada, I'm in Florida, so we're not actually working, together, but we're in constant communication, and I can tell when she's getting stressed out because she's got too much going on.
Mm.
And she can tell when, the same thing is happening with me, and we can talk about it and we can say, okay, what do we need? This is too much. We need to draw a line here and, cut some things back, put some deadlines off. And that really helps, having somebody else who's there with you. And so I think having a community within the writing group is super important, because as much as your family loves you and supports you, they don't get it. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of times they don't get it. And so having people who do get it, that you can talk to and say, oh my gosh, I'm feeling so overwhelmed. I really need to get this done, but I'm just, struggling, or whatever it is. They can give you, they can act as a sounding board, first of all, for you to just be able to unload, and they
Mhm.
understand what you're dealing with, but they can also help you with solutions. We've all been there. So I think that's very, very important for writers to have someone in the writing community that they're in touch with on a regular basis. Sometimes it's for accountability, but sometimes it's just for support.
And it's one of my favorite things about working in this industry is just how supportive the community is
Yeah,
to
for
one
sure.
another. It's like such an industry full of people that want to build each other up. And
Yeah.
yeah, I guess probably part and parcel of it being such a kind of isolated career choice,
Yeah.
it's a very solo thing. You are sitting down and writing. So I think that's really good advice. I'm wondering if, like, I know it can be so easy to maybe get a little bit distracted about like the state of the world or personal things that are happening or anything like that. But do you have advice that you do to kind of fill your cup if your creativity is maybe not feeling there, so you can kind of get back into that flow state? Do you have
Yeah.
anything that you do to sort of help knock some creative thinking into your brain?
I I'm pretty good about just taking a day. I think
Mm,
so many times when we're burned out or when we are dry, we just keep pushing because it has to get done. Like, and not working feels more stressful because now I'm not working and the stuff is not getting done. But I know that when I try to push through in those moments, it just get worse. It doesn't get any better. And so I have to like take a morning, and I'll go for a walk, or I'll go get Starbucks, or I'll, lots of different things, to just something that is not work and is not writing. And I think that that very often gives me a break and allows me just some, to think of other things and to just kind of get perspective. Um, so that's one thing. And oh gosh, I had something else and I completely forgot what it was. The other thing is to just change my environment.
mm.
If I go to the library or I go to a coffee shop, a lot of times I find it's just easier to work there when I was having trouble getting the words down at home.
Yeah, I think it's really valuable that you're saying also to still take the time, like whatever your allotted time is. I think even myself at work, if you're not you get so used to being on the hamster wheel of like the frantic busyness. But even if you're taking that thinking time, that's like, those are probably even more valuable. You're going to solve some plot problem that you have. If you
Right.
take a long walk, it's going to come to you, or like that's still time that you might not be physically writing, but you're thinking about it.
Yeah. And I would say that that's learned experience. That's not,
Mhm.
that's me being in the situation and doing it all wrong and not being able to get out of my own head until I realized it's counterproductive and I need to be trying something else, And so, and that's again where the writing community comes in, is that
Yeah.
you are going to have people who are farther down the track than you, who have already gone through what you've gone through, and they kind of see how, what the different options are when you just don't know yet. And so I'm happy to be able to share my pain if it helps people.
Well, maybe ties into kind of coming up on a couple of my last questions here. What's something that you wish you knew at the start of your writing career?
I wish I knew that it would take so long to get to a a really good place of knowing my craft well enough to be really good at it, to be able to support myself as an author, I guess I should say, because it just looks easy when you start, like I had read a million books, like, come on, I can write a book. And then you sit down to write it. And then I even still thought it was great. My first chapter book, I sent it out. I mean, I literally like got a book on how to publish a children's book and I started submitting it. It was awful. It was in terrible shape because I didn't know anything about like editing or critique partners or anything. So yeah, that's crazy. What was your question? I completely lost
Just
track.
what you wish you knew at the beginning.
Yes, that was it. So I just thought it was going to be super simple and easy. And I think self-publishing has contributed to that because you can just click the button and then it's published and there's nobody saying no, there's nobody saying it's not good enough. And now again with AI, I mean, we see another kind of another iteration of that where now you can just, I have an idea and I can just get AI to write it for me. And so I think that it's so important to dedicate yourself to the craft that, and just know that it's going to take a long time. I mean, what is that statistic that it takes 10,000 hours to master anything? I mean, it takes a lot of writing. So I would encourage everyone to recognize that this is a long haul proposition that you're taking on, and that is okay, because all along the way, it's not about the published book, even though that it is about the published book, but it's about everything that you're learning along the way. I mean, like it seems like it's taking forever to get to the end, but you're reaching milestones all along and you're learning things that you didn't know before. And you can look back at old manuscripts and go, oh my gosh, wow, I'm so much better than I was then. And it's a process and it takes a long time. And so I would say to just know that it's going to take a while and be okay with that. Partner with people who are going to help you learn, who can teach you things, read books, read craft books, follow the people online that kind of know what they're talking about in a certain space, go to conferences, like do all of those things and just enjoy the process because you're making progress all along.
And there kind of is no end because you're constantly learning with the craft. So it's like
right.
I always think like having that quality of like really loving learning is just something that's so important to like, as you're getting better at this craft, the more you learn, you might want to dive into a genre that you thought you would never be interested in. And oh. My apologies. I have two of them today and they're just barking at each other. But just that there's no, I think the milestones are very important and just constantly be learning and learning from one another.
Yeah.
What are you working on right now? Speaking of what you're learning on, is there another thesaurus in the works?
There is. We're working on one that's going to come out in the spring. It's on fears. So it'll be the fear thesaurus. And it's about how fear plays into character arc, coming out of that wounding event and then leading into the development of the dysfunctional emotional shielding behaviors that we all develop and the character develops. And then it also looks into how fear can play into story structure and how if you can tie the character's fear into the turning point moments, it creates these choice moments where they have a choice to make. They can decide to revert back to what's comfortable, but not really working so well, or they can, move forward into something that's uncomfortable that requires change, that requires changing their way of thinking and pushing through that fear to get to the next stage of the process.
Well, Gabby can't wait for the fear book. And Richard is asking, is it up for pre-order right now or?
It will be, I don't think we're doing a pre-order exactly. We've just launched a Shopify store that has our ebooks in it, and we're getting ready to put our paperbacks up next month to sell so we can sell direct. And we're going to be selling it in the Shopify store in April. And then in May, it's going to come out like everywhere else. So cool. Kind of.
Nice. So where can viewers find you online if they're interested in getting this book?
So we're at writershelpingwriters.org. There's a bookstore tab that takes you to all of our books. And we also have onestopforwriters.com, which is a It's a subscription service that we've created a bunch of tools that contain the information in our books. So we have a character builder there that helps you build your character from scratch and covers all the things that you need to know when you're building a character. We have a story maps tool. We have a world building tool. So two different kind of branches of the same tree there.
Nice. And Vanessa's just dropped them in the chat there for people so they can find them easily.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Becca. I feel like I learned a lot as the non-writer, learning a lot about craft to eventually tackle that story. I
Cool.
really appreciate your time and really diving into the emotions and the craft here. And thank you everyone for the questions throughout. This has been really, really fun.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back talking about some fears.
I would love it.
All right. And we will see you next month. Thank you everyone for tuning in. And if you're tuning in after the fact, appreciate you doing that too. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.